On the poorest continent, the plight of children is dramatic. Africa is considered the poorest continent on Earth. Almost every second person living in the states of sub-Saharan Africa lives below the poverty line. Particularly affected by poverty in Africa are the weakest members of society, their children and women. Poverty in Africa, the indicators. According to the World Bank, the international poverty line refers to those who have less than $1.25 a day to live, and thus live on the very edge of existence. The United Nations Development Program, UN, sets various indicators in its Human Development Index, HDI, to measure poverty in Africa and all other countries in the world. This includes life expectancy at birth, average school attendance period, expected school attendance period as well, per capita income. As the indicators show, education is closely linked to poverty by the United Nations, because those who cannot read and write have little chance of getting a skilled job and build their livelihood. In the annual report on human development published by the United Nations, UN, the African countries of Malawi, Liberia, Burundi, Eritrea, Chad, Sierra Leone and Niger are regularly in last place. This has not changed until 2014. A mother with a baby in front of her mud hut near Gode, Ethiopia. Especially in rural areas of Africa, extreme poverty continues to increase. A mother with a baby in front of her mud hut near Gode, Ethiopia. Poverty in Africa. Read these facts and figures. Extreme poverty leads to hunger in Africa. More than a quarter of the hungry in the world live on the African continent. 1/5 of people living in Africa are considered malnourished. This gives the continent the highest rate of malnourished people worldwide. More than 30% of African children suffer from growth disorders such as stunting due to their chronic malnutrition. This disease causes a physical and mental underdevelopment in children. Sub-Saharan Africa is the region with the highest infant mortality. On average, 1 in 11 children dies before his 5th birthday. 3 of the 4 countries with the highest infant mortality worldwide are on the African continent: Ethiopia, Nigeria and Kenya. In addition to complications at birth and malnutrition, there are diseases such as pneumonia, diarrheal diseases and malaria, which lead to the early death of many children. In sub-Saharan Africa, 59 million children between the ages of 5 and 17 work instead of playing and going to school. They fight poverty for their families. In Africa, every 5th child is cheated out of childhood and forced into child labor. 25 million Africans are infected with the HIV virus, including approximately 2.9 million children. Many have lost one or even both parents and live as AIDS orphans on the street. Child labor is a common problem. Take action. Give a gift to children in need. Support the work of the SOS Children's Villages in Africa. Help with your donation or sponsor a child in Africa. Poverty in Africa. Causes. The extreme poverty in Africa has many reasons, some of which are closely linked. Key causes of poverty in Africa and the suffering of millions of people include growth of population. Population growth on the African continent is rapid, despite numerous prevention and education campaigns. Developmental success and economic growth cannot keep pace with this. The result, more and more Africans live in poverty. According to a recent study by UNICEF, the population of Africa will double by 2050 to 2 billion people. War and crises. Of the world's 20 war-related conflicts in 2013, 11 alone were fought on the African continent, all in sub-Saharan Africa. This includes the wars in Sudan and South Sudan, Somalia, Nigeria, Mali, the Democratic Republic of Congo and the Central African Republic. In the crisis regions, agricultural production usually comes to a standstill. Many people flee, are forcibly expelled from their homes and are dependent on outside help. Poverty in Africa is increasing as a result of these wars. Climatic conditions. The African continent has been suffering more and more from climate change in recent decades. Devastating floods and extraordinary drought periods lead to crop failures. The consequences are regular hunger crises and famine in Africa. Particularly affected are East Africa and the Sahel region. Illnesses. Diseases such as AIDS, malaria or Ebola are the cause but also the result of poverty in Africa. Lack of education and inadequate medical care in many regions means that diseases spread faster and cannot be treated. The average life expectancy of the population is decreasing and the number of orphans is increasing. Loss of labor is particularly noticeable in agriculture and leads to reduced food production. Inadequate agricultural infrastructure. Roads, wells, irrigation systems, storage facilities, agricultural machinery. In many regions of Africa, agriculture lacks both infrastructure and expertise. That's why local self-help is so important in helping to fight poverty in Africa. Unjust trade structures. Rich countries create unjust trading structures by shielding their markets with high agricultural tariffs and heavily subsidizing their own agriculture. This slows down the development of agriculture on the African continent, causing it to suffer from the outset. The governments of the US, the countries of Europe and other prosperous states thus contribute to poverty in Africa with their policies. African girl and school class. Orphaned and abandoned children find a new home in the 147 children's villages across the continent, and we run 720 SOS programs throughout Africa. With our long-term development projects and emergency humanitarian aid, SOS Children's Villages has been fighting poverty in Africa since 1970, mostly with your donations.